Okay, so in this video, I want to talk more about why most LinkedIn lead gen fails, in my opinion, and what you can be doing instead, or at least my approach that I like to take when trying to focus on LinkedIn lead gen instead. So the first thing is that you're probably typically going to find that when it comes to LinkedIn lead generation, whether you have been doing this yourself, whether you have outsourced this to someone else, that there's typically some common themes that I tend to see and that maybe you tend to see that just don't seem to work. So one of the first ones is typically going to be when everyone is automating everything, right? And I understand there are lots of automations out there, and obviously AI has gotten better for LinkedIn. But the issue is when you try and automate all of your lead generation, there's only so much that it can do. And because this is getting more and more common nowadays, a lot of the times automating everything just doesn't simply do as well as it could do, right? Now this might be, for example, automated sort of campaigns and stuff that will then get sent to all sorts of different people. And although this isn't particularly bad, a lot of the time these approaches that they then take aren't as good, right? It will tend to just be, things like pictures, which are effectively copy and paste to however many people. And although this somewhat can work, right? I mean, and maybe if you've got a really good pitch and like a really good offer, then that's all cool. But typically, people get pitched enough on LinkedIn, and it's just not going to simply give you enough consistency and results for what you're doing. And I also find as well, like on top of the automations, and just that general process, it also becomes very difficult to personalize things. And when I mean personalize, a lot of people think personalize is like, oh, you include their name, like in the message, or perhaps their business in the message. That's not personalization, right? I think personalization for me is like being able to actually look at their recent post or just something that they're doing. Maybe they sort of moved into a new role. Maybe they got a new certificate. Perhaps they did something in something of their recent post, or just their just generally their activity, and making some form of comment about it. You don't need to sort of write an essay of sorts, but just effectively acknowledging that you've seen it, you've taken the time to look at what they're doing, right? I feel like that's the sort of stuff that is going to at least bring some level of awareness to the sort of messages you're sending as well. And there's a few other things, but generally I find that, a lot of the time people, well, it makes sense, right? People want to just outsource the lead generation. They want to spend as least time possible, as possible on it. Because honestly speaking, I don't really think anyone really enjoys, spending consistent time trying to get leads. I think you and I just both want to focus on, closing deals and want to deliver for clients the best way we can, right? That's effectively what we sort of signed up for, not all this lead generation stuff. So, generally, knowing that, I wanted to share more specifically in terms of the approach that I tend to take, both for just myself, but also for my clients, when it comes to focusing on lead generation, the stuff that typically works. So, the first thing I'm going to focus on is making sure that we are first, and for me, I am reaching out, or at least I'm connecting with ideal clients through a verified lead list, and also I'm refining the profile. So, what does this mean? So, the first thing I want to make sure, when I'm working for anyone or even just myself, I want to make sure that the first thing is my ideal client on LinkedIn, right? That's the first thing. Are they on LinkedIn? Typically, probably yes, right? I mean, if you've got a B2B offer or sometimes even B2C, typically they're going to be on there, right? So that's usually going to be a yes. The second thing is, do they then have a problem that you can solve, right? That's obviously a really key thing. Do they have a problem you can solve? Typically speaking, yes, they're going to have it. Cool. And then, really, just the last thing here is, can you then reach them, right? Are you then able to reach them in terms of sort of just where they're at? And hopefully that's also a yes. And the best way we're going to be able to reach them is through LinkedIn Sales Navigator. Now, whether you've tried this before or used this before, my focus is just basically being able to be able to actually find them, target them, and then just start sending connection requests. We're not sending any notes with this, it's just completely empty, and we're just sending connection requests. And this will typically be maybe between about 20, about 20 to 30, just generally every single day, right? My goal is to max them out by the end of the sort of the week. But what this means is that When this list is set up, right, and I'd be filtering for things such as obviously that they posted in the last 30 days. And when they post in the last 30 days, sometimes that is just a repost, but that at least means they are active on LinkedIn, right? So those people are still valid, but I might also look for things like industries, job titles, sort of company headcount. It's just focusing on those few sort of filters that really matter. And obviously that's this is the list you can always refine as you go. What this means is that you have the confidence that every single day you are getting in front of 20 to 30 sort of potential idle clients. Now, whether they obviously accept that connection request or whatever they do with it is obviously different, but you typically know that you're getting in front of the right people a lot of the time. That's really key, right? Because I speak with a lot of founders that even struggle to do that. So that's really a first step. The second thing is obviously, profile clarity. So you obviously know that at this point you need to make sure your profile is optimized. The thing I'm focusing for optimized profile is focusing on clearly showing who you help, what you do, and how you do it. That's really what matters, and focusing on less is more. Because, for example, when you do send that connection request, typically someone's going to look at your profile. They're going to take a look at your profile. They're going to look at the banner, going to look at the headline, and they're probably going to scroll a bit further down, maybe to your content, your about section and featured section and such. So what you want to do here is you want to make sure that this is clearly showing who you help, what you do, and how you do it, and ideally the results you are getting or that you can get for your idle clients. So for me, this might typically look like a banner that sort of tries to communicate the core result that I get, a headline that focuses on sharing exactly who I help, what I do, how I do it, and then usually in the feature section, I'll try and highlight some social proof, for myself or for my clients, so that for example, when you do send that connection request and they are trying to see, perhaps a bit more about what you do, they can see that very clearly. And it's an easier decision for them to make. So that's the first thing. And for reference, that sort of lead list is going to be, when I'm working with a client, that will be something that they hand verify that they are happy with as well. So the second phase here is then manual warm outreach and qualifying questions. Now, this sounds horrible, but my focus here is I'm not trying to send loads and loads of messages. My focus is trying to message the right people because at the end of the day, I would much rather book in a few calls that were more qualified than book in loads of calls that were just a bit out of there. So obviously, before I sort of mentioned about, typically, like a lot of people using automations that we know tend to be used for outreach. So when I'm thinking of sort of, manual warm outreach, the things I'm thinking of is focusing on taking those people that are more familiar with me. So this being, my new connection, which obviously we've sort of used in the sort of lead list here, and being able to start this conversation. I might also look at things like profile views and such. Typically, these new connections is going to be where more of my warmer leads are going to be. And once I've sort of got those people, that's when I'm going to start the conversation, right? And I'm going to start the conversation. I'm going to do two things. I'm going to personalize the message and I'm going to ask a qualifying question, right? And this is pretty straightforward. So when I'm personalizing the message, all I need to do is look at their recent post and pick out something specific that I sort of like about what they're doing, or at least something that they would be appreciative of being complimented on. Such as, I don't know, they went to an event, they hosted something, whatever it might be. Usually something small, doesn't have to be much, but it just shows that you've taken the time. And then you have the qualifying question. So this is not a pitch, right? This isn't a pitch, neither is this some lengthy process where I'm trying to build loads of fake rapport. All I'm trying to do here, and I'm focusing on trying to identify, do they have a problem or not, right? It's very simple. It's they've either got a problem or they don't, right? So, for example, this could be, for me, I like the qualifying question for my industry might be something like, "Hey, how sort of lead generation going along?" Or perhaps I might even ask a question such as, "Is lead generation pretty consistent lately?" Or, "Did it feel a bit hit or miss?" Right? Just something like that. Now, yes, obviously, a question like that, sure, maybe it's a little invasive. Some people might think it's perhaps a bit upfront and a bit much. But at the same time, you need to understand that, especially where LinkedIn is now, you can't just be, first of all, you can't just be pitching immediately up front because a lot of the time people are ignoring that stuff. and I get pitched a lot, and honestly, I ignore it, right? Because it's never personalized and it's always just up in my face. However, I'm also going to usually ignore the people that try and, pretend that they care about me and build this fake rapport, only to then pitch me later. But what I much prefer is, or at least, like from a receiving end, if someone's going to, or effectively want to get something from me, I would much rather they took some time to look at the stuff I do and maybe personalize something. Right. So for example, I obviously post YouTube videos every week. I post a newsletter every week. If they even just said, "Hey, I saw your recent newsletter about this," that would be enough, right? I'd be like, "Oh, okay, they've actually taken the time," right? So that's one thing. And then the qualifying question, typically you're going to want to test this, and the qualifying question is typically going to want to be the same in terms of what you sort of go to test. It will just more so be this personalization, which changes per client. But what this is basically going to mean is that when this happens, I am typically going to get three responses. I'm either going to get ghosted, I'm either going to get a no, or I'm going to get a yes. If I get ghosted, typically I'm just going to then follow up. Now, I typically tend to follow up maybe about 2 to 3 times, just because I'm going to take the assumption that they didn't see the message. And then if I follow up a second time, I'm assume that they saw the message but didn't get a chance to respond to it. And then if I follow up a third time, I'm assuming they saw the message and didn't respond to it. And I might just sort of close that off and maybe sort of have a bit of a soft pitch at the end, just in case, perhaps now's not the right time. If they say no, then typically, obviously, it depends what kind of, no or rejection it was. If it was like, no, I'm all good, fine. I'll just move on to the next person, that's fine. However, at the same time, some people will almost either say no or give you a slight objection to almost push you off. Like this obviously is up to you. You can either just take it as it is, or you can try and just qualify a bit further to see if they're like if it's an actual genuine no, right? So that's something I tend to usually do, and that's obviously entirely up to you. But obviously, if you then get a yes, and by yes I mean someone opening up to having a slight problem, or having a sort of like a big problem on that scale, and then from there, all I'm trying to do, assuming I've got sort of uh, enough clarity on the problem that they've shared, I'm going to then propose a call. Now, a lot of the times, assuming they've opened up to you about a problem, you can pretty much propose the call right there and then. Now, sometimes you might want a bit sort of more clarity, but that said, don't make this a massive back and forth conversation, because you're going to be able to talk about the stuff on the sales call. Just have enough information or enough of a clear pain point that they have to make it necessary. So that's generally the process I take. And this might be, sending about 5 messages a day. So about maybe sort of 25 messages a week. And typically speaking, obviously times that by 4, you're looking at maybe 100 new conversations every month. And I'd like to think that, assuming you're sort of using, obviously the sort of the sales nav list over here, typically speaking, I'm assuming that from that 100, you'd be able to book about 5 sales calls, and you might be able to close one. That's sort of my sort of approach with it. Obviously, there's follow-ups on top of that, which for me, I've got my own processes that allow me to follow up far, far easier. But typically, that's the approach that I'm going to take for myself and my clients. And the last thing here is then content. Now, the reason I leave this till last is because this is not as important to me, or really, I'd honestly say to you, as it really should be. So I've got one big problem with content, as good as it is, and obviously I'm recording content now. But when I'm talking about content, I mean LinkedIn content. The huge problem I have with that is you just don't have as much control over your LinkedIn content as you think you should. Because at the end of the day, the algorithm is controlling this primarily, right? And don't get me wrong, content is good. Content is good for just really showing a bit more about what you do, and just generally be able to build a bit more trust. Because that said, obviously, if we sort of talk about the sales nav lift, when you're sending 20 to 30 of these connection requests and they see your profile, chances are they're going to scroll down and they might see your content as well, and that might just help reinforce. That said, I also know a lot of people that have almost try to rely on content for their lead generation. And the thing is what I would say to this is, well, if you don't have any control of your content in terms of the amount of people that sort of see your content, but also the actual type of person that actually goes and sort of sees the content, then you're effectively relying on luck when it comes to your lead generation, which is why I almost have content as just something to work in the back as opposed to this is my lead generation approach. And this is the same for my clients and for myself. The main things I will focus on is making sure that I'm connecting with the other ideal clients and then I'm reaching out to them as well. That is typically my approach, and it's something that has sort of served me best, generally speaking. So hopefully you found this useful because generally speaking, I'm finding that most people that are playing around with lead generation in terms of just sort of founders, coaches, and such, it's either, when they do approach LinkedIn lead generation, a lot of the time they don't have the time, right? They don't have the time and energy, or perhaps they do, but they just simply don't want to, and that is totally understandable. It really is like, how can I best automate this, and just effectively get rid of this and get some results coming in at the same time, right? And so obviously here, with this approach, there's either two things you can do. You can either do this yourself and you can sort of put this together, which typically speaking, this approach doesn't take as long as you think it will. For me, when I'm sending connection requests, Monday to Friday or maybe Monday to Saturday, that's going to take me like 6, 7 minutes, if that, right? Assuming I've got that list set up, I'm sending about 20 or 30, and that's that. Then for the manual outreach, typically speaking, if I'm sending about maybe 5 messages a day, perhaps doing a few follow-ups, that might take like 25, 30 minutes, right? It very much depends, but a lot of the time that's pretty much where it's going to be at. And then obviously for content, typically I'm going to be creating content sort of once a week and I'll sort of batch create it. So for example, today is a Saturday, which is when I tend to sort of create all my content. And that maybe takes maybe 2, 3 hours. But that said, this is because I'm also doing videos. If you're doing tech stuff, it's probably going to take a bit less as well. So that's obviously one of the side of things. And obviously the other option is basically outsourcing it. Which in this case, if you like this approach and you feel like this approach would be better suited for you, then you can always look to actually take a look more at my website in terms of what I'm doing at the time of me recording this video. I currently offer a done for you offer where you can effectively outsource this to me as well, in order to get sort of effectively qualified book calls consistently, just on a pay for performance basis. So hopefully you found this useful, and like I said before, those are obviously your two options. But if you take anything away from this, hopefully you can, and you can at least experiment with something. But that said, hope you found this useful, and I'll chat soon.